My name is Rachel Harmon. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a certified public accountant. On September 4th, 2024, at 11:47 inches the morning, I received an email that was not meant for me. It was a forwarding error. My aunt had typed my address instead of her attorney's, a single letter off, and in that mistake, she handed me everything I needed to prove what she and my uncle had been doing to my 1-year-old grandfather for the past 2 years. The email contained a wire transfer confirmation. $43,000 moved from my grandfather's savings account to a private LLC registered in my cousin's name. The memo line read, "Property liquidation proceeds." My grandfather didn't own a property anymore. He thought he did. He had been telling me all summer that he was going to leave his house to me when he passed. I had no idea it had already been sold 6 months earlier. They didn't know I keep records. They didn't know that as an accountant, I understand exactly how money gets hidden, and exactly how to find it. And they definitely didn't know that I had been quietly worrying about my grandfather for months, saving screenshots, writing dates in a notebook, because something had felt wrong for a long time, and I trusted that feeling the way you only learn to trust something after it saves you once. What my aunt thought was a small clerical mistake became the thread that unraveled everything she had spent 2 years building. If you're still with me, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because I want you to know what happened. Every single piece of it, from the beginning. I need to take you back about 8 months before that email arrived, to January 2024, to a Sunday afternoon phone call that I almost didn't pick up because I was in the middle of tax season and my phone had been ringing every 4 minutes with client questions. I answered because the contact read Grandpa, and I always answered for him. He sounded confused, not the slow kind of confused that comes with age and tiredness, but a sharper kind. The kind that sounds like someone reaching for something they were just holding and finding their hand empty. He asked me if I knew anything about a refinancing. Said my aunt had brought him some papers a few weeks back. Told him it was routine. Told him it was just to update some records on the house. He'd sign where she pointed. He couldn't remember how many pages there were. I kept my voice calm. I told him I didn't know anything about a refinancing, but that I would look into it. I asked him to describe what the papers looked like. He said they were thick. Maybe 40 pages, maybe more, and that my aunt had said he didn't need to read the whole thing, just the last page. I hung up, and sat very still for a moment. In my line of work, when someone tells you they signed a 40-page document on the instruction of a family member who told them not to read it, that is not a paperwork update. That is a transaction being concealed from the person signing it. I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I labeled it Grandpa. I typed the date, January 19th, 2024, and I wrote down everything he had told me word for word. I didn't know yet what I was documenting. I just knew that documentation is what separates a gut feeling from evidence, and my gut was telling me this was not going to resolve itself quietly. Here is what you need to understand about my family. My grandfather, Walter Harmon, built a life out of pure discipline. He worked 31 years in manufacturing, retired at 63, and spent the next 2 decades in a 3-bedroom house on a half-acre lot in Knoxville, Tennessee, that he and my grandmother had bought in 1978 for $47,000. My grandmother passed in 2019. He was alone after that, but he was sharp, independent, particular about his routines. He mowed his own grass until he was 79. He kept a paper ledger of every household expense, a habit from decades of watching every dollar. He had no debt, no mortgage, and somewhere around $180,000 in savings accumulated over a lifetime of spending carefully. My mother was his youngest daughter. She passed away from cancer in 2021, which left 2 of his 3 adult children, my aunt and my uncle, by marriage on her side. My aunt, his middle daughter, had always been the loudest presence in the family. The one who organized gatherings, managed RSVPs, sent the group texts, positioned herself as the coordinator. After my mother died and my grandmother was already gone, she became the person my grandfather leaned on by default, because she was there and she was willing, and he was grieving and grateful for the presence. For the first year that seemed fine. Then things shifted. I started noticing it at Thanksgiving 2022. My grandfather mentioned that my aunt was handling some of his bills now, said it was easier, said she had set up automatic payments for him. He said it like it was a kindness, and maybe it started as one, but I noticed that when I asked him what his account balance was, something he used to know to the dollar, he said he wasn't sure, that my aunt managed that now. A man who had kept a paper ledger for 40 years no longer knew his own bank balance. I wrote that down. Christmas 2023. My grandfather pulled me aside in the kitchen. He was whispering, which was not something he did. He asked me if I thought it was strange that his property tax bill had come addressed to a name he didn't recognize. He showed me the envelope. It listed my cousin's LLC as the property owner. I took a photo on my phone, told him I would look into it, and note the date in my notebook when I got home. 2 weeks later, I drove to the county recorder's office in Knoxville. I paid $12 for a copy of the deed history on my grandfather's property. The transfer was dated March 14, 2023. His house, the house he had owned outright for 46 years, had been transferred via a quitclaim deed to an LLC called HV Property Holdings, registered in my cousin's name. The notarized signature on the document read, Walter Harmon. The handwriting did not look like my grandfather's. His signature was always bold, slanted hard to the right, with a strong W and a definitive loop on the H. The signature on the deed was small, cramped, shaking. It looked like the handwriting of someone who was either being rushed or had not fully understood what they were signing, or both. I photographed both signatures side by side and added them to my folder. That was when I stopped thinking of this as a family concern and started thinking of it as a case. The email arrived on September 4th, and I read it 4 times before I moved. The wire transfer confirmation showed $43,000, leaving an account in my grandfather's name and arriving in HV Property Holdings. The timing matched what I already knew. The property had been quietly sold to a third-party buyer in February of that year for $218,000. My grandfather had no idea. As far as he knew, he still lived in his house, and would until he died, and it would pass to me. What he did not know was that he had been paying rent, framed to him as a property management fee, on a house he no longer owned, to an LLC controlled by his grandson, who was skimming the proceeds and distributing a cut to my aunt and uncle, who had engineered the entire thing. I called my grandfather that afternoon. I kept my voice even. I asked him how he was doing, asked about his week, asked if anyone had visited recently. He said my aunt had come by on Saturday, brought dinner, stayed for a couple of hours. Then he said, almost as an afterthought, I've been meaning to ask you something, sweetheart. Do you know if I'm supposed to be paying a management fee on the house? Someone has been taking $850 a month from my account for the last year and a half, and I thought it was for maintenance, but I called the city about a gutter issue last spring, and they said no one had been out to the property. $850 a month for 18 months. $15,300 in fees for maintenance that never happened. I told him I would look into it. I told him not to mention to anyone that we had talked about this. He asked me why, and I said, just for now. Grandpa, please trust me on this. He said, I always trust you, Rachel. You're the one who always tells me the truth. I had to set the phone down for a minute after that. I took 2 days off work. I told my supervisor it was a family matter, and she did not press me. I sat at my kitchen table in Louisville, with every document I had gathered over 9 months spread in front of me, and I started building a formal evidence log, the way I would approach a forensic audit, because that is exactly what this was. I started with the property. The quitclaim deed transfer dated March 2023. I had already established that the signature was inconsistent with my grandfather's documented handwriting, but I needed more. I pulled his prior tax filings, 3 years of returns where he had signed on the same line. I photographed each one and placed them beside the deed signature. In 5 separate samples, his W had the same distinct double loop at the top. The deed signature had no loops at all. I documented this across 12 comparison photographs. Then I moved to the financial records. My grandfather had given me limited power of attorney for medical purposes only in 2022. A precaution after a brief hospitalization. That document did not give me financial access, but it was enough for me to request a records review from his primary bank by presenting myself as his representative in an elder care context. His bank had a senior account protection line. I called it, explained my concerns. A manager put a soft flag on the account and sent me 6 months of statements with my grandfather's verbal consent, which I obtained on a recorded call with the bank representative present. What I found went beyond the management fee. There were monthly transfers of $1,200 labeled family support going to an account in my cousin's name. There was a $6,000 withdrawal in November 2023 with the memo line medical equipment that I cross-referenced against my grandfather's Medicare records. He had purchased no medical equipment in November 2023. There were 2 wire transfers I could not immediately explain, totaling $29,000, dated 4 months apart, both going to HV Property Holdings. When I added everything I could document, the total taken was $94,000 over 26 months. That was not a family borrowing money. That was a systematic extraction. I called the Tennessee Adult Protective Services intake line on September 9th. The woman who answered was professional and methodical. She asked me how I was connected to the alleged victim. I told her I was his granddaughter and a licensed CPA, which made me a mandated reporter under Tennessee Code Annotated 716103. Her tone became more focused. She told me this call would take approximately 45 minutes. I told her I had taken the day off for exactly this reason. I provided everything. The deed discrepancy with photographic comparison of signatures, the financial timeline, the management fee payments for non-existent maintenance, the family support transfers, the unexplained wire amounts, the property sale proceeds, redirected to an LLC my grandfather did not know existed. At the end she said, "Miss Harmon, based on what you have described, this will be classified as a high-priority financial exploitation case. A field investigator will contact you within 72 hours. You should also consider consulting an elder law attorney, as you may be looking at criminal fraud, in addition to civil recovery. Do not alert the alleged perpetrators." She gave me case number 2024 to 7741. I wrote it in my notebook, put the notebook in my fireproof safe, and then I sat on the floor of my home office for about 10 minutes, because I had just set something in motion that could not be stopped, and part of me, the part raised at family dinners where everyone pretended everything was fine, was aware of exactly what that meant. The other part of me, the part that had spent 2 days staring at forged signatures and manufactured fees, was certain I had done the only thing that was right. The investigator arrived on September 12th. Her name was Carol Emmons. Tennessee Adult Protective Services, 18 years in elder financial exploitation specifically. She interviewed my grandfather for 2 hours at his kitchen table while I sat in the corner as emotional support and said nothing unless she asked me directly. My grandfather answered every question clearly. He confirmed he had not knowingly sold his house. He confirmed he did not know what HV Property Holdings was. He confirmed he had been told the monthly payments were for upkeep. When she showed him the quitclaim deed and pointed to the signature line, he put on his reading glasses and stared at it for a long time. "That's not how I sign my name," he said. "My W has always had a double top. My father taught me that when I was 7 years old." His voice was steady, but his hands were not. Carol handed him a tissue without a word and waited. She photographed everything I had assembled. Before she left, she said, "Mr. Harmon, you have done nothing wrong. What has happened to you is a crime, and we are going to treat it as one." My grandfather nodded slowly. He looked at me. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something was wrong for a long time." I said, "I suspected. I needed to be sure before I said anything." He was quiet for a moment. "You're like your mother," he said. "She always waited until she was sure." 3 days later I retained an attorney. Margaret Owens, elder law and financial exploitation, 22 years of practice in Nashville. She reviewed my evidence file in 40 minutes, and looked up with the expression of someone who had seen a lot, and was still surprised by this. "Rachel," she said, "you have done 90% of my job for me. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of coordinated elder financial fraud I have reviewed at intake. We are not just looking at civil recovery. We are looking at criminal fraud charges, forgery, and potentially wire fraud, given the interstate transfers. We outlined the legal strategy. Emergency petition for conservatorship, placing my grandfather's finances under court protection immediately. Motion to freeze HV property holdings. Forensic accounting subpoena to reconstruct the full 2 years of transactions. Civil suit for recovery of all documented losses. And referral to the Knox County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution consideration on the forgery and wire fraud counts. Margaret said the conservatorship hearing could be scheduled within 10 days. The rest, months, possibly longer. But we control the timeline now, she said. They don't. My aunt called on September 17th. I had not spoken to her in 3 weeks and she opened with, "I've been trying to get in touch with your grandfather but he's not answering my calls. Is everything all right?" Her voice was warm and careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed the temperature of this conversation before dialing. I told her my grandfather was fine. She said that was a relief, that she had been worried, that she and my uncle just wanted to make sure he was being properly looked after. I said, "I'm making sure of that." She said, "Wonderful. We should all get together soon, maybe Sunday dinner." I said I would be in touch, and ended the call. Then, I saved the recording. My cousin called 4 hours later. He didn't bother with the warmth. "You need to stay out of family business. I'm not sure what you think you found, but you're interfering in arrangements that were made a long time ago and that Grandpa agreed to." I said, "I'd like to see the documentation of that agreement." He said, "It's all handled properly." I said, "I know it's not." Long pause. Then he said, "You're going to cause a lot of damage over something you don't fully understand." I said, "I understand wire fraud fairly well. Actually, it's my job." He hung up. I saved that recording too. The conservatorship hearing was scheduled for September 27th. Knox County Probate Court. Judge Diane Whitmore presiding. 14 years on the bench. My aunt and uncle arrived with their own attorney, a man in a navy suit who opened by arguing that the existing family arrangements were voluntary and consensual, and that I was a well-meaning but overreaching family member, inserting myself into matters that had been managed responsibly for 2 years. My cousin was present but sat in the back and said nothing. Margaret presented the evidence file. The forged deed signatures with comparison documentation. The financial timeline. The management fees for non-existent maintenance. The LLC transfer records, the APS substantiation report, which had arrived 4 days prior. 3 allegations investigated, 3 substantiated. Financial exploitation, substantiated. Forgery, substantiated. Fraudulent property transfer, substantiated. Judge Whitmore reviewed the file for 9 minutes in silence. Then she looked at my aunt's attorney. "Counsel, I've read your client's response brief. It argues that the transfers were consensual gifts, and that the property transfer was estate planning. Can you point me to the written consent documentation for any of these transactions?" He shifted. "Your Honor, these were family arrangements, and not all of them were formalized in writing." She said, "So there is no written documentation." He said, "The nature of family." She said, "Counsel, I'm asking a yes or no question. Is there written consent documentation?" "No, Your Honor." She set down the brief. She turned to my aunt directly. "Mrs. Calloway, your father signed a quitclaim deed, transferring his home of 46 years to your son's LLC. His handwriting on that document has been compared to 5 authenticated samples by a certified document examiner, retained by the petitioner. The examiner found the deed signature to be inconsistent with Mr. Harmon's known signature in 14 distinct points. Did you witness your father sign that document?" My aunt's voice was barely audible. "I was present, yes." "Did you explain to him that he was transferring ownership of his property permanently, and without compensation?" Pause. "We explained it was part of an estate arrangement." "Did he receive any proceeds from the sale of that property when it was sold in February of this year, for $218,000? The Navy suit attorney leaned over. My aunt did not answer. Judge Whitmore looked at my cousin. "Mr. Calloway, HV Property Holdings is registered to you. The property sale proceeds totaling $218,000 passed through that LLC. Bank records subpoenaed show $43,000 wired to that entity from your grandfather's personal savings account on September 3rd of this year. Can you explain the purpose of that transfer? My cousin said. It was a management distribution. She said. A management distribution paid to the manager from the client's personal savings. He said nothing. She turned to my grandfather, who was seated beside me. Mr. Harmon, I want to ask you directly. Did you knowingly and voluntarily agree to transfer your home to your grandson's company? He said, No, ma'am. I thought I was signing insurance paperwork. I would never have given away my house. I've lived there since I was 37 years old. Did you authorize the monthly payments of $850 labeled as property management? No, ma'am. I thought that was being taken for gutter cleaning and lawn care and the like. But nothing was ever done. I had to call my neighbor last winter to help me with the ice on the steps because no one ever came. He said it quietly and clearly, the way a man says something he has been waiting a long time for the right person to hear. Judge Whitmore set down her notes. I have been on this bench for 14 years. I have seen families disagree about estate planning. I have seen disputes over who was promised what and when. This is not that. What I am looking at is a coordinated scheme in which an elderly man's trust in his family was used to strip him of his home, his savings, and his autonomy, while maintaining the appearance of care. She looked at my aunt and uncle. You used your position of access and trust to execute a property transfer that has the characteristics of forgery. You collected fees for services never rendered. You directed proceeds from his assets to your son's private entity without his knowledge or consent. And you did all of this while presenting yourselves as the people responsible for his well-being. Then she looked at me. You identified this, documented it with professional precision, and pursued every available legal channel to protect him. You did not act out of anger. You built a record. That record is why we're here, and not 6 months from now, with this man having nothing left. She paused. My rulings are as follows. Emergency conservatorship granted. Effective immediately. Rachel Harmon is appointed conservator of Walter Harmon's financial estate. HV Property Holdings is frozen, pending forensic accounting and criminal investigation. Eliza Calloway, Richard Calloway, and Derek Calloway are barred from contact with Walter Harmon, except in the presence of the conservator. This matter is referred to the Knox County District Attorney's Office for criminal review of forgery, elder financial exploitation, and wire fraud. We are adjourned. My aunt started crying loudly. My uncle sat rigid, staring straight ahead. My cousin walked out without turning around. As we left, my grandfather took my arm. He walked slowly, but he held on tight. He said, I want to go home, Rachel. I said, You are home, Grandpa. The house is yours. We're getting it back. My attorney filed for property recovery on the grounds of fraudulent transfer the following week. Because the quitclaim deed had been executed through forgery and without informed consent, it was voidable under Tennessee law. The third-party buyer was an innocent party and could not be dispossessed. But the proceeds from the sale, $218,000, were recoverable through civil action against HV Property Holdings and its principals. The forensic accounting firm, Margaret Retained, finished their review on October 22nd. Total documented loss, $112,400 over 26 months. The breakdown was precise. Property sale proceeds improperly directed, $81,000. Monthly management fees for non-existent services, $15,300. Family support transfers from my grandfather's account to my cousin, $14,400. Unaccounted withdrawals with fabricated memo lines, $1,700. My cousin's bankruptcy filing appeared in public records on November 8th. He had $4,200 in assets and $61,000 in personal debts. HV Property Holdings had been dissolved 4 days after the conservatorship hearing, but dissolving an LLC does not dissolve liability, which his new attorney appeared to be explaining to him at some length based on the number of continuances filed. On February 3, 2025, The Knox County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges. My aunt was charged with elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. My uncle was charged as a co-conspirator. My cousin faced 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery. The forgery charge carried a sentence of 2 to 12 years under Tennessee statute. My aunt's attorney called Margaret the same afternoon the charges were filed and opened with the phrase, "My client would like to discuss a resolution." Margaret said, "I'll pass that along to the conservator." She passed it along to me. I said, "They can talk to the DA." The civil recovery suit settled in March 2025. Total recovery, $98,000, which was the maximum collectible, given my cousin's bankruptcy. The money was placed into a protected trust, established specifically for my grandfather's care. I was named trustee, and not beneficiary. Every dollar in that trust is for him. His medications, his home maintenance, his physical therapy for a knee that had been getting worse, since he stopped being able to afford the co-pays during the 2 years my aunt was controlling his finances, his groceries, his gas, his Saturday morning breakfasts at the diner on Merchant Drive, that he has gone to every week since 1987, and that I had not known he had been skipping because he was worried about money. My aunt and uncle pleaded guilty to reduced charges in April 2025 exchange for full restitution, cooperation, and a suspended sentence with 3 years of supervised probation. My cousin pled no contest to 1 count of wire fraud, and was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a 5-year bar from serving as an officer of any financial entity. His social media, which had been full of posts about passive income strategies and real estate investing with other people's trust, went private the day the charges were filed, and has not been updated since. My grandfather's attorney filed a notification with the church where my aunt had served as treasurer for the women's ministry for 11 years. The church board asked her to step down during the investigation. She has not returned. My uncle was asked to resign from the local Rotary chapter after a fellow member who worked in the DA's office mentioned the case at a lunch meeting. These things happen in smaller cities. People find out. My aunt sends me emails occasionally, long ones, about how she was trying to protect her son, about how the financial situation got out of hand, about how she never meant for things to go this far. I read the first one. I did not read the rest. I am not her confessor, and I am not interested in the narrative she is building for herself. I am interested in my grandfather. Walter Harmon is 82 years old now. His weight is back up. His knee surgery went well in January, and he finished physical therapy in March. He is back to mowing his own lawn, though we compromised on a riding mower because his doctor asked me to, and my grandfather eventually agreed when I pointed out that the riding mower was objectively more fun. He still keeps his paper ledger. He showed it to me last month. Every entry accounted for, his handwriting exactly as it always was, bold, slanted, right, double top on the W. He knows his bank balance to the dollar. He reviews his statements every month and calls me if anything looks unfamiliar. He calls me every Sunday afternoon, always around 2 o'clock, always with at least one piece of news from the diner. The waitress who has worked there since the 90s finally retired, and he attended her going-away party and brought her flowers. He called me on the 1-year anniversary of the APS report. September 9th, 2025, he said, "I've been thinking about what you did. All those months you were keeping notes and not saying anything yet. That must have been hard." I said it was. He said, "You waited until you were sure. And then when you were sure you didn't hesitate." I said, "I learned that from you, Grandpa." He has kept his paper ledger for 60 years, and he has never bounced a check in his life. He taught me that numbers don't lie. You just have to read them carefully. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty. For reporting family, for the criminal charges, for the way it upended everything. Here is what I say. I feel guilty for the months I saw warning signs, and moved slowly because I was afraid of being wrong, afraid of causing a scene, afraid of the particular shame that comes with accusing people who share your last name of things you cannot yet prove. I do not feel guilty for what happened after I had proof. That version of the story is simple. An 8-1-year-old man was being robbed by people he trusted. I had the skills to prove it, and the legal obligation to report it. The rest was just doing my job. My grandfather was not a transaction to be settled before he died. He was not an inconvenient line item or an asset to be liquidated while he was still alive to watch it happen. He is a man who kept a paper ledger for 60 years, and mows his own lawn and tips his waitress 20%, and remembers the names of everyone at the diner. He is a person, and what they tried to take from him was not just money. It was his clarity, his dignity, the knowledge that the people who sat at his table and called him family were there because they loved him, not because they were waiting for him to run out of time. He has a riding mower now, and he uses it every Saturday morning, and he says it is the most enjoyable 2 hours of his week. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to do things right. Got his chance, and I got to watch him take it. I am not carrying anyone else's version of this story. I am just the granddaughter who paid attention, and that was enough.